Welcome to a record once thought too brief to matter, filed under County Ledger, Oglethorpe, Georgia, August 1856. The page begins with no title, only a single sentence. The woman known only as Dinah refused to speak after the meal. The ink thins halfway through the line as if the pen hesitated. Below it, another hand added, "All three men expired before dawn." The house was found empty. The handwriting trails downward, a faint tremor suggesting haste or disbelief. The edge of the paper darkens as though something scorched it long after the words were written. The entry stands alone in the book, a thin column of ink between accounts of crop yield and livestock purchases. There are no witnesses, no mention of a coroner, no record of an inquest. The deputy's final notation, faint and water-stained, reads only, "Her whereabouts remain unrecorded. Property seized." The line beneath is blank, its emptiness louder than any verdict. Years later, when archivists unrolled the brittle page under a fluorescent lamp, the text shimmered faintly as if refusing to fade. Decades after that night, a Works Progress Administration field worker traveling through rural Georgia recorded a testimony from an elderly woman near the Oconee River. Her cabin stood alone, roof-sagging walls lined with bundles of dried herbs. The interviewer wrote that she spoke in a voice both steady and detached, recounting events without emphasis as though describing weather. Her words were taken down as she said them. "They had me cook. I done it quiet. They laid down with full belly. By morning, I was already gone." The interviewer added one final line beneath the transcription. Subject claims she never saw them again. Refused to give name. Nothing more. No mention of age, origin, or condition. In the WPA Index, her statement appears under the anonymous heading, Unverified Recollection, Oglethorpe County. The interviewer's notes mention only that she wore a dark head wrap and that a musket hung above her door, rusted but cared for. What remains of her life exists only in fragments, 3 sentences in an official record, 4 lines in a federal transcript. The rest is silence. The meal, the refusal, the missing men never confirmed, never denied. Some said she walked north under a new name. Others said she vanished in the swamps before reaching the river. Local children grew up hearing whispers about a woman who could feed death without touching the plate. The story traveled, but the proof stayed buried. No local church recorded the burial of 3 white men that summer. No family ledger marked their passing. The only surviving trace is a county page filed between property disputes, now preserved on microfilm, the ink trembling under magnification. The archivist who handled it in 1932 wrote in the margin, "Document partially burned. Origin unclear. For a century and a half, that silence has remained intact like a room left locked too long. It waits not for discovery, but for recognition." Historians still argue whether it belongs to crime resistance or myth. The moral lines blur when the oppressed write justice in blood. But the record stands, a woman unnamed. A table set a quiet act that changed nothing and yet refused to vanish. In every retelling, the air grows heavier around her name, and the silence after the meal returns like an echo that will not stop. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're watching from and the exact time you paused. What did you feel in that silence? The earliest traceable mention of the incident appears in the Oglethorpe County Court Ledger Volume 4, stored at the Georgia State Archives in Morrow. The book is leather-bound, its spine collapsed from heat exposure, and the lower right corner bears the smell of smoke. Restoration notes confirm the ink as iron gall typical of the mid-19th century. Each page shows faint outlines of moisture damage suggesting that the ledger may have survived a fire before being cataloged. The handwriting on this relevant page belongs to Deputy Clerk Thomas A. Weller, who served between 1853 and 1859 under Sheriff B.C. Lang. His penmanship, neat and controlled in most entries, begins to waver midway through the passage mentioning the woman known as Dinah. The ink lightens, the strokes become uneven, and the lines stretch downward as though his hand was trembling. Archivists later noted that this entry differed stylistically from the rest of his records. The ledger places the event between 2 unrelated matters, a report of a missing mule and an entry concerning a shipment of tobacco. The juxtaposition feels almost accidental, as if the record was inserted without formal procedure. There is no case number, no docket, and no witness signature. Only 3 sentences, each separated by a deliberate space, as if to emphasize that no continuation was ever expected. In 1929, State Archivist Samuel Blythe began a project to re-index pre-Civil War county ledgers across Georgia. During his audit of Oglethorpe's surviving materials, he discovered the fragment now referred to as the Dinah record. His summary in the Georgia Historical Commission notes describes it as an incomplete entry, possibly local in nature, concerning the death of 3 plantation employees. Blythe's tone is neutral, but his marginalia betray hesitation. Possibly apocryphal handwriting shifts unknown source. 2 years later, in 1931, a fire in the basement of the Oglethorpe County Courthouse destroyed nearly 2/3 of its archival materials. Most criminal ledgers from 1850 to 1860 were reduced to ash. The Dinah record survived only because Blythe had commissioned a photographic copy, 3 cellulose negatives labeled Box 17, Folder 9. These negatives remain the sole surviving visual evidence of the entry. Their edges curl inward as though the image itself recoiled from being seen. Each negative captures a faint extra line that does not appear in other transcriptions. Property seized. No whereabouts recorded. This edition has been the subject of long-standing debate. Handwriting analysis suggests it may not belong to Weller, but to an unidentified clerk who wrote with lighter ink and different pressure. Whether it was appended in 1856 or during a later audit remains undetermined. By the time the negatives reached Atlanta, the original ledger was gone. No duplicate existed, and the microfilm copy contained dust specks that obscure several words. In 1933, Blythe filed a final summary of his findings to the State Historical Board, writing unverifiable, possibly symbolic. Retained for linguistic record only. The entry was shelved and ignored for decades until another name reappeared: Eleanor Page. In 1937, Page, a field worker under the Federal Works Progress Administration, began collecting oral histories in northeast Georgia. Her supervisor, Dr. Harrison T. Clive, specialized in documenting folk survivals, beliefs, and memories from communities of formerly enslaved people. Page's itinerary for that summer lists one unusual stop cabin near Oconee River, 4 miles east of Lexington. Her notes refer to an elderly woman of small build dressed in dark wrap, unafraid of the recorder. The transcript of Page's interview appears in WPA Slave Narratives, Georgia District Files, Volume 3, Section GA 112B. It contains only 5 lines of dialogue rendered phonetically. They had me cook. I done it quiet. They laid down with full belly. By morning I was already gone. Beneath it, Page wrote in her own hand, refused name, declined prayer, cabin locked when we left. No further comment was added. The final entry in her field log that day reads simply, return tomorrow. When researchers reviewed the WPA records in the 1940s, they noticed that GA 112B corresponded geographically and temporally with the same location mentioned in Blythe's 1929 index. The coincidence led historians to believe the anonymous woman Page interviewed might have been connected to the legend of Dinah. There was no way to confirm it. Page disappeared 2 years later. Project correspondence from 1941 notes that Page's car was found abandoned on a dirt road near the Oconee River. Her field notes were missing. Her recording equipment was intact. The case never appeared in newspapers, likely due to the wartime blackout of domestic news. Only one marginal note survives, written by the Georgia District Director field worker, not accounted for. Last assignment, Oglethorpe County. That note was rediscovered in 1978 by archivist Lucinda Heron, who annotated it with a red pencil line, possibly the same road referenced in her 1937 notes. This micro-hint, small, nearly invisible, became the seed of later speculation known as the Oconee vanishing. Heron's report closes with a remark that feels almost out of place in an official summary. History resists closure when the page is still warm. Modern scholars have traced both Blythe's and Page's paths through overlapping archival projects. The first dealt with legal ledgers, the second with memory. Both ended with missing pages. In the entire WPA collection, Page's interview is the only one lacking a biographical section for the informant. The omission is unexplained. The form simply stops halfway down the page as if the typist ran out of breath. The physical artifacts of this case now exist across 4 separate institutions: the Georgia State Archives, the Library of Congress, the Atlanta University Center, and the University of Georgia's Folklife Library. Each holds fragments, a scan, a carbon copy, a burned corner, a line of phonetic dialogue. No complete document exists. The archivists who handled them describe a pattern of incompleteness, almost deliberate, as though the record itself resists coherence. The fact layer rests upon handwriting and ink, the folklore layer upon a voice caught once and never again. Their intersection forms a narrow corridor of probability, neither provable nor dismissible. It is here that the academic study stops and the cultural memory begins to hum beneath it like an echo too low to record. Some historians, like Mary Ellis Porterfield in 1947, dismiss the account as a folk invention misfiled among judicial documents. Others, notably Howard McAdams in 1949, argued that the ledger entry's tone and phrasing matched genuine deputy records. His analysis, published in the Georgia Historical Review, pointed out that Weller's style of abbreviations was unique to officials trained in Athens during that period. He concluded that the text was authentic, though incomplete. However, the opposing theories share one absence. None can explain the disappearance of both primary witnesses, the woman interviewed by Page and Page herself. Their parallel vanishings form a strange symmetry. The archivists who processed the files decades later sometimes referred to them collectively as the two missing voices. Officially, this phrase never appears in state documentation. It survives only in oral retellings among the archivists' families. In 1999, during a digitization project, technicians at the Georgia Archives discovered that the final sentence of the 1856 entry glowed faintly under ultraviolet examination. The chemical analysis indicated copper sulfate, an element found in ink used to correct earlier mistakes. Someone had rewritten that last line. Whether it was to clarify conceal or emphasize remains unknown. The report filed under Restoration Note 1299 concludes alteration observed, motive indeterminable. By that time, the ledger's physical remnants had been declared too fragile to handle. The page exists now only as a digital scan, blurred, high contrast, and incomplete. In the official database, it is labeled Twice File a Legal Record and File B Oral Correlation. The system software will not allow one to delete either tag. They coexist stubbornly, like two overlapping truths that refuse separation. The microfilm containing Page's transcript was revisited in 2018. On frame 485, a faint fingerprint appears, likely hers. It rests precisely over the words, "I done it quiet." The discovery prompted a brief academic discussion about the physical proximity of the recorder to the recorded. The conclusion was unremarkable. Trace belongs to field worker, no significance assigned. Yet for many, the coincidence deepened the unease surrounding the record. Between 1930 and 2000, 9 separate researchers attempted to verify the identity of Dinah. Each produced more questions than answers. One found a Dinah listed as a cook in plantation accounts from 1854. Another found a freedwoman of the same name in an 1870 census. None matched in age, origin, or handwriting. It is as though each trace belonged to a different ghost wearing the same borrowed name. The mystery extends to the 3 men listed as victims. No obituary, no estate filing, no surviving family correspondence names them. The Lang family plantation records, which should have documented the deaths of overseers, list only staff losses due to illness. That phrasing, common in the antebellum South, often masked violent causes of death. The ledger's sparse phrasing, "expired before dawn," matches the euphemism used for poisonings in rural county records. Local oral tradition preserves a parallel version. The men were buried without marker on high ground near the Oconee. This detail, mentioned in a 1903 church newsletter, was later dismissed as hearsay. Yet soil surveys from 1952 show a shallow depression near that site marked as subsidence possible burial zone. The report was never followed up. Through all revisions, the file remains unresolved. Each researcher adds another annotation, another hypothesis, another missing piece. And yet, no one closes it. The file resists finality. The story continues to oscillate between evidence and absence, a ledger with no case, a voice with no name, a history that records but does not explain. The archives list the incident under 2 designations: historical anomaly, uncertain provenance, and oral testimony, local legend. To the database, both are equally valid. To history, both are equally incomplete. What began as a note of death has become a study in endurance, how a silence once written can outlive every attempt to understand it. The first factual layer begins in August 1856, when an official notice appeared in the Savannah Republican runaway woman named Dinah, 25 years of age. Skilled cook, formerly property of the Lang estate near Oglethorpe. Reward $25 for safe return, alive and unharmed. The addition of alive and unharmed is rare. Most notices end simply with return. The language reveals both anxiety and hesitation, a pursuit shaped by fear more than duty. 2 weeks later, a second advertisement repeated the notice but added a detail missing in the first. She was last seen near the Oconee crossing carrying a tin pot and sack. That sack appears again in later folklore, where it becomes the container for the meal that ended the night. The intersection between evidence and legend begins precisely here, between tin earth and the silence of whoever copied her name. A year later, in 1857, an Oglethorpe court ledger notes 3 deceased male workers under the Lang estate, cause of death undetermined. Their deaths were filed as losses to property, not as human casualties. The estate was compensated. The report's handwriting matches that of Deputy Weller, though the ink shade differs slightly, perhaps diluted. The description stops mid-sentence, as though the recorder expected a follow-up that never came. In 1864, a Union quartermaster's report from the Army of the Tennessee includes a curious passage: one local colored woman assisted troops navigating swamp terrain near Oconee, familiar with road where no man followed. The officer, Captain W.E. Donahue, added, "She refused food, spoke little, guided with hand not word." The observation is factual, yet his phrasing carries unease, as if he sensed something that would not fit into his report. From the folklore side, stories collected decades later speak of the cook who walked the river road. She appears at dusk, hands clean, eyes hollow, and when she speaks, the night hushes. One telling says she crossed the river without ripple tin pot tied to her belt, the smell of root and vinegar following. The tale insists she was neither slave nor free, but something in between, a woman who fed death then left the table standing. The Freedmen's Bureau files from Athens in 1867 list an unnamed freedwoman claiming prior service under Lang estate. Requests written statement of voice. Her only recorded words: "They took my child, and I took their peace." The clerk added in red pencil, possibly allegory applicant coherent. The record was not pursued. Her handwriting signature line is blank, as if refusal became its own verification. In the same period, a local parish ledger from Mount Zion records a donation for burial of 3 souls without cross given by woman in mourning dress declined to attend service. No name, no address. The clerk drew a thin cross beside the line, but left it unfinished, the horizontal stroke never written. When analyzed under magnification in 1984, the ink stroke stops sharply, as if the pen was lifted mid-motion. Folklore scholars from the Georgia Writers Project found in oral accounts a story titled "The Supper Without Witnesses." It tells of 3 overseers who died before dawn, their mouths stained blue, their bodies left facing east. The storyteller, identified only as Aunt Millie, concluded, "She didn't run. She walked quiet, same way the river walked quiet when it hides the moon." The phrasing mirrors the rhythm of older African spirituals, where silence becomes both shield and weapon. In official correspondence between Sheriff Lang and the state office, fragments remain that mention the matter of poison suspected among colored quarters. Lang writes, "No physical proof. Doctor refused examination. Weather too hot for preservation." This sentence ends the file. The sheriff's name appears again months later, signing a requisition for new deputies. No inquiry reopened the deaths. Bureaucracy replaced investigation. By contrast, oral tradition along the Oconee replaced silence with chant. Children were told not to eat food left unattended overnight. Mothers whispered, "Never take from the pot if the cook don't smile." The saying endured long after names were forgotten. The story changed form, from warning to myth, from fear to ritual, until Dinah's name dissolved, replaced by title, "The Woman Who Fed Them Sleep." A fragment of military dispatch from 1865 stored in the National Archives includes a note about an abandoned cabin containing remains of cooking implements, glass bottle residue, and iron tools. The report labels it suspected laudanum contamination. The file closes with the phrase, "Area vacated by unknown woman, no pursuit ordered." The cold neutrality of the report contrasts with its unease. It acknowledges something happened, but refuses to ask why. In the 1870s, spiritual songs began circulating among black congregations in Georgia's Piedmont region. One chorus repeats, "They ate, they rest, she walk." The tune follows a 6/8 rhythm typical of work songs, yet its lyrics describe no labor. The refrain concludes, "She done eat last, but she's still here." When transcribed in 1938, folklorist H.T. Clive categorized it as reckoning hymn, origin unknown. He noted that the congregation sang it softly without clapping. From the factual archives, another clue appears in the probate files: estate damages settled claimants deceased. The estate belonged to the Lang family. The compensation amount was deducted for loss of human capital. Beneath it, in smaller script, someone wrote, "Payment accepted by surviving kin, no dispute filed." That short notation closed the record forever. its cruelty preserved in tidy handwriting. Meanwhile, dream accounts began to surface. In 1882, a plantation nurse named Sarah Elkins wrote in her journal that she dreamed a woman stood by the stove stirring something that wasn't soup. She described the smell as like lilies turning to iron. The next morning, Elkins reported the entire kitchen had gone cold, though the fire was still burning. Her journal entry ends with the line, "I think she came back to check the fire." The handwriting slants downward, a confession to the page itself. In 1894, an anthropologist named Giles Ransom collected testimonies near the same river. His notes describe a recurring phrase among locals, "She feed the evil right." He interpreted it as to make peace with wrong by doing wrong correctly. His last entry, written weeks before his death, reads, "The woman remains unnamed. She is their justice because law would not hold her name." The journal is unbound, the pages stuck together from humidity, preserved now in Emory's archives. The court dockets of Lexington from the 1850s include a brief log, "Temporary detainment of colored female, no charge filed, released to unknown claimant." The date matches the weeks following the poisoning. No record indicates what became of her. The same page contains a blot shaped like a thumbprint. Chemical analysis reveals the ink to be mixed with sugar residue, a sign it was written in a kitchen or near food, an accident that somehow circles back to her domain. Folklore, on the other hand, continues the story as haunting. In 1901, an elderly storyteller named Rebecca James told interviewers, "They said she came back to the cabin, sometimes lighting a fire no man could see." James paused before adding, "But when you walk there, you still smell supper." The tape of her interview crackles at that point. The last two words fade as if swallowed by air. The silence feels intentional, as though the machine understood the need to stop. The Freedmen's Bureau memorandum from 1868 refers again to an empty dwelling avoided by locals due to superstition. The clerk dismisses it. No economic impact. Yet, in the same report, a note describes soil discoloration, patch of dead grass in perfect circle. The phenomenon is marked natural, but the circular form recurs later in regional ghost stories, the mark left by a supper table no longer there. Among the spirituals recorded during the 1930s in Athens County, one anonymous voice sang a line that researchers still discuss, "I cooked them peace." The words are indistinct, half prayer, half verdict. Some archivists claim the recording distorts there because the singer cried. Others say the wire simply caught interference. Either way, the silence that follows feels like part of the song. By the 1940s, the name Dinah had become both historical placeholder and legend. The Georgia Folklore Bulletin listed the quiet supper under narratives of retaliation alongside stories of conjure women and haunted kitchens. The compiler Clara Montrose added one note. The story differs because it ends without pursuit. The silence is her escape. Her comment unintentionally echoes what every record implies: she vanished by choice, not fear. In the surviving fragments of both fact and faith, a pattern emerges. The official records end in bureaucracy. The oral records end in breath. The first is static cold without pronoun. The second moves, shifts, adapts. One says expired before dawn. The other says fed them peace. The two sentences describe the same moment in two languages, one written to forget, one sung to remember. By the close of this layer, neither history nor myth holds authority. The ledger speaks in ink. The song replies in silence. Together they form a dialogue no archivist can translate fully. It is the rhythm of absence, documented, believed, unverified, alive. The county ledger of 1856 carries two entries that do not agree. One reads, 3 male servants deceased, unknown fever. The next, signed in the same week, states evidence destroyed, inquiry closed. The ink is darker, the pressure heavier, as if someone wanted to bury sound inside words. Later, archivists called it clerical confusion. Locals called it cover. Between those two lines, history learned to whisper. A year later, the Savannah Republican repeated its runaway notice, but one word had changed. Escaped became missing. The ad no longer chased, it grieved. What the newspaper lost in accuracy, it gained in superstition. Readers began to refer to the woman not as fugitive, but as the one who went quiet. Grammer wrote her first epitaph. The 1867 Bureau report mentions a freedwoman who says her masters died in peace. The clerk added, possibly allegorical. But allegory was how truth survived when it was not permitted fact. His red pencil erased nothing. It underlined prophecy. That file tagged unproven became a hymn before anyone sang it. A military survey years later noted unfit land odor strong. The scientists called it decay. The villagers said that's where the table breathed. The same smell, the same place, two definitions. In one chemistry, in the other consequence. Both exact, both sincere. An 1870 court docket lists a female prisoner released to unknown custody. The next line reads, "Prisoner not returned." The ledger stops there. The space below stays blank like a held breath that no one dared to exhale. Archivists call it damage. The folklore calls it her exit. By the early 1900s, songs about her replaced sermons. One verse says, "She don't flee, she feed another. The meal stayed warm till dawn." Scholars argued the rhythm was accidental. The singers said it wasn't rhythm, it was remembering. The pause between verses measured the time before death. In 1937, WPA worker Eleanor Page wrote of voices in the soil. Her final diary entry ends mid-sentence. 2 years later, she disappeared while revisiting the Oconee Road. The only photo left shows still water under cloud. Some say the negative overexposed, others say the silence did it. The Bureau's phrase remains, "No survivors found." The folklore answers. But the drums still answered through the night. Both can't be true, yet both remain. Fact closes the door. Legend knocks once more. Somewhere between them, the woman keeps breathing, and the record keeps listening. The later documents no longer belong fully to either law or faith. They resemble translations of each other written by strangers who never met. A 1902 courthouse transcription of the 1856 page includes an addition re-verified by clerk. Event remains unsolved. The same sentence appears almost word for word in a 1903 church ledger entry. The event remains unsolved and therefore remembered. Bureaucracy had begun to echo the hymn without realizing it. The language of procedure adopted the rhythm of prayer, and that rhythm began to haunt the very tone of state record-keeping. By 1910, the Lang estate's correspondence shifts from property to reputation. A letter between heirs mentions the persistence of rumor regarding the cook and her supper. One line reads, "No amount of silence seems to reduce the telling." The phrase "reduce the telling" reappears years later in a spiritual collected from former field hands near the Oconee. "You can hush a man, but you can't hush what he feed." This parallel marks the earliest trace of folklore feeding directly on administrative phrasing, a cycle of mutual consumption between paper and voice. A state agricultural report from 1913 describes the soil of the Lang property as dark, soft, abnormally productive with faint sour odor. The description is clinical, yet it matches exactly a phrase in an oral account recorded decades later where an old woman said, "That ground smell like it done ate something it can't forget." Two languages separated by bureaucracy, describing the same unease, one through measurement, one through memory. The scientists called it fertile. The people called it fed. Both were correct. The 1921 Georgia Folklore Society's field notes record a woman named Rebecca Tillman describing her grandmother's warning, "Never bless your table unless your heart clean." She said the warning came from a woman who fed her pain and got peace. The collector labeled the statement "Parable of Forgiveness." Yet the phrasing mirrors the freedwoman's line from the 1867 Bureau file. "They took my child. I took their peace." The expression traveled unbroken across generations and genres, transforming from testimony into scripture, retaining its cadence even as its faith shifted from paper to mouth. An 1888 correspondence between a Baptist deacon and a local magistrate survives in microfilm, one sentence nearly erased by time. They say she left no mark except one word carved under the table. Mercy. The authenticity of this claim is unverified. No table was ever recovered. But the story persisted and entered folklore as the mercy cut. In some versions it was not carved but burned. In others it appeared in ash. Every retelling rewrote the location but preserved the word. Mercy became her final gesture in every tongue that followed, even in those that denied her name. In 1905, Reverend Alton Birch submitted a brief theological article to the Southern Methodist Review. He wrote, "If justice was denied by court and granted by supper, then the supper itself becomes a court." His peers accused him of blasphemy. The journal refused publication, but the phrase spread locally among preachers as Birch's paradox. 2 years later, an untraceable pamphlet appeared quoting the same line credited simply to the witness of the table. Even suppressed the sentence multiplied a reflection of how her story lived through refusal. Every attempt to remove her produced a new appearance. A 1916 WPA pre-study on regional myths of retribution filed by researcher Mildred Gant notes, "The Oconee incident remains distinct from other poisoning tales. Its tone is stillness, not fury." She adds, "Locals insist the cook never fled, implying no fear of consequence." Gant underlines the phrase, "no fear." This small annotation reveals the central difference between legend and law. The former preserves emotion, the latter deletes it. Gant's pen halfway between both trembles on the page. Her report ends abruptly with source-refused signature, a line that reads like ritual more than paperwork. By the 1920s, songs about her spread through work camps coded as spirituals. One such hymn, "The Table Done Rest," contains the lines, "They call it sin, but it sound like prayer. They call it poison, but it tastes like air." The refrain blurs judgment into perception. Scholars later argued the lyrics expressed fatigue more than faith. But for those who sang, the song was not explanation, it was continuation. They were not retelling her story. They were keeping it fed, ensuring silence did not starve it. In 1929, a University of Georgia folklore catalog logged the song under non-Christian ballads. The entry was crossed out in red ink and reclassified under devotional hymns. The archivist who made the correction, Clara Montrose, left a note in the margin. "It belongs to both." This single act, the refusal to choose, marks the first scholarly acknowledgement that the tale had become a double entity. From that moment on, the story's nature as both sin and sacrament became permanent. In 1932, a WPA photographer documented rural rituals near the Oconee and noted in his logbook, "Women gather each August to wash the dirt near where she fed them." When asked why, one participant said, "To keep her memory clean." The photograph is lost, but the caption survives. It reads simply, "Annual cleansing place unnamed." The historian who later transcribed it added a comment in pencil. "She became the river's conscience." That marginalia turned the observation into liturgy. The ritual was never church-sanctioned, but the church borrowed its rhythm anyway. An archival anomaly dated 1937, when WPA fieldworker Eleanor Page filed her final report on the Oconee testimony. The last page ends mid-sentence. "She told me her name was," the typewriter jammed at the dash. The next page is blank. Page vanished 2 years later along the same road. Her notebook was found in her cabin, water-damaged but legible. Inside the margin of her unfinished sentence in different handwriting, someone had added, "Don't matter what her name was. She finished the meal." The handwriting remains unidentified. That same year, a freedman's descendant named Joseph Lang, distant kin of the plantation owners, wrote a letter to the Georgia State Archives offering to donate family records. He included a note, "Perhaps you can find peace for the one who gave none." The phrasing is deliberate reversal. In offering to find peace, he acknowledged her agency in denying it. Archivists filed the letter under private correspondence, emotional, but it stands as the first written evidence of guilt within the lineage that once owned her story. By 1940, researchers began noticing overlap between two seemingly unrelated oral lines, one from the freedwoman's testimony, "I took their peace," another from the later hymn, "She gave them peace." The evolution of a single verb took to give marks the theological transformation of the narrative. It no longer sought vengeance, it sought release. Justice inverted itself into grace. The act that began as crime now survived as communion, and no document could explain when that shift occurred. A 1942 weather report noted localized heavy rain over Oconee vicinity, despite no regional storm. The accompanying note, "Citizens report smell of vinegar in precipitation." Scientists attributed it to industrial waste. Folklore attached a different cause. "She washing the air." The phrase "washing the air" appears again in a 1953 spiritual recorded in Atlanta whose refrain repeats, "She wash away names, not sins." The act of erasure became cleansing. The bureaucratic became baptismal. The archive's reign turned into a ritual. In 1949, historian Giles Ransom published his essay, "The Ethics of the Quiet Meal." His opening line reads, "When vengeance teaches mercy, the ledger becomes gospel." Ransom died 3 months later of pneumonia contracted during fieldwork. His essay circulated among academic and church circles alike, treated as both research and sermon. His death folded neatly into the pattern of disappearance that had always surrounded her story. The woman's silence extended to those who tried to define it. Each interpreter vanished a little while writing her down. During the 1950s, the State Historical Commission began microfilming the Dinah materials for preservation. The film captures a flickering at frame 247 exactly over the phrase "her whereabouts remain unrecorded." Technicians assumed damage, yet the same distortion reappeared every rescan. Someone eventually nicknamed it the breath. On playback, the flicker produces a subtle pulse every 3 seconds. The sound engineers called it noise, but the archivists who'd spent years with the story described it as heartbeat. Their job titles forbade belief, but their silence implied it. In oral testimonies gathered through the 1960s, descendants began calling her not Dinah, but the woman of return. They said she'd come when we get quiet enough. The interviewer asked how they knew. One replied, "Because the quiet start talking." In their grammar, silence is not absence but occupation. It fills space left by record. The archive speaks through stillness. The people listen through memory. Both systems describe her with identical precision, unverified, persistent, complete. A 1975 archaeological survey near the Oconee clearing uncovered ceramic fragments showing faint letters resembling MER. Laboratory reports listed as tool markings indeterminate. Local residents immediately called it the Mercy Pot. Scientists hesitated to confirm connection, but public curiosity forced the object into display. Visitors left offerings beside the case: spoons, stones, pieces of paper reading, "She done eat last." The museum staff removed them daily, noting reappearance each morning. The log entry for these incidents uses an odd term, resubmission of memory. In the 1980s, a wave of revisionist historians reframed her story within resistance studies, yet their academic precision could not escape the moral residue. One writer concluded, "Perhaps she found peace through precision. The recipe was exact." Another argued, if the record's silence was her rebellion, then every blank line is her survival. The paper became an altar of absences, the thesis a form of prayer disguised as analysis. Even scholarship started to sound devotional when written in her shadow. When digital preservation began in the 1990s, technicians reported an unexpected interference during the scanning of her file, a soft, rhythmic static that matched the tempo of the "She Done Eat Last" recording. The anomaly recurred only on her folder. Engineers labeled it resonance error. Internally, the archivists named it her breathing. Every department has since logged it at least once. The current database includes a maintenance note reading, "Sound persists, though no file contains audio." It is a technical impossibility and a spiritual inevitability. Modern theologians now quote her in sermons, without naming her, referring only to the silent cook. They say she represents the justice that refuses applause. Professors cite her as metaphor for survival without victory. Every field history, theology, folklore uses her differently, but all arrive at the same impasse: she cannot be concluded. The law wrote her to disappear. The song keeps her alive. Both continue, neither surrendering authority. And so fact and folklore merge into one continuous breath. The paper and the prayer have become interchangeable languages. The same phrase now serves both as record and benediction. All three men expired before dawn. In the archive, it marks closure. In the hymn, it marks release. Each recitation completes the other. The act once called crime now functions as remembrance. Justice denied in life finds permanence in retelling. Her silence, transcribed across centuries, has become the only consistent truth left in Georgia's memory. The final intersection of fact and faith emerges through repetition. The same sentences appear in both archives and songs written years apart by hands that never met. The ledger says all three men expired before dawn. The hymn replies, "Three men sleep till dawn, and she walk by light of morning." The words differ by one verb, but the meaning dissolves into identical silence. The bureaucratic account ends where the spiritual begins, like two halves of a sentence severed by history. Each time someone copies either version, the ink trembles in almost the same rhythm, as if the memory itself insists on alignment. The 1939 restoration of the Lang documents introduced a paradox the archivists could not explain. When ultraviolet lamps were used to read the page, the ink of the final line fluoresced stronger than expected, revealing another faint word beneath: returned. It was written directly under the phrase, "property seized." 2 generations of scholars have debated whether returned referred to her, to the land, or to the silence itself. The discovery was logged in the restoration file, but not in the official record. Even now, the word remains visible only under certain light, and archivists describe it as unstable text. They mean it fades when observed too long. In the 1947 Georgia Folklore Bulletin, a field note from Clara Montrose recounts a dream reported by an informant near the Oconee. The woman said, "I saw a table float on the water, still set with plates, nobody on it. It turned slow, like looking for her." Montrose marked it as dream, not narrative. Yet the vision mirrored the 1856 report almost perfectly: the table, the empty house, the missing woman. Scholars now see this as the first documented merging of dream and document. The witness was not alive when the original event occurred, but the imagery crossed the timeline, as if the story itself remembered who had forgotten it. By 1952, a state geologist conducting soil studies near the Oconee clearing filed an unrelated observation: slight vibration underfoot, low-frequency hum, duration 2 seconds. The report categorized it as groundwater movement. When the notes were transcribed, the typist underlined the phrase 2 seconds twice. The same duration appears in the tempo marking of the spiritual She Done Eat Last. Musicians analyzing early field recordings noticed that the song begins with a 2-second pause before the first verse, a silence always left intact. Whether by coincidence or collective design, the music holds the same length of stillness as the ground that inspired it. In that silence, both science and spirit found each other without knowing. When the ethnographer played the hymn recording inside the archive vault for comparison, the resonance of the playback caused dust to rise from the ledger shelf. A fine film of soot fell over the table. The staff later described it as static discharge from the speaker, but the archivist in charge, an atheist by his own notes, wrote privately, "It felt like the record exhaled." He filed the incident as an environmental anomaly. The notation once again reads, "No verification possible." Fact still insists on its own integrity. In 1963, the state published an index of pre-Civil War legal irregularities. Entry 117, Lang, BC, property dispute following staff deaths, unresolved. The editor added the cross-reference, see local legend, Oconee Cook. The inclusion of the word legend in a government document marks the first time folklore entered official historiography in Georgia. What law once silenced bureaucracy now footnoted. The line dividing record and rumor began to blur until no one could tell whether the archive was quoting the hymn or the hymn was quoting the archive. In oral tradition, the tone shifted from terror to reverence. The woman was no longer described as murderer, but as a keeper of balance. In the 1968 version of the song, the final verse adds, "She don't speak no more, but she still judge." The melody slows, almost halts, as though letting silence deliver the verdict. Ethnomusicologists observed that the performance ends not with applause, but with collective breathing. Each singer inhales audibly before the last chord fades, an unintentional echo of the ledger's own gasp before the missing word. Sound becomes confession. Breath becomes punctuation. A letter dated 1971 from archivist Lucinda Herron to the Georgia Historical Society reveals how the team cataloging the Dinah materials began referring to them collectively as the living file. Herron wrote, "It resists closure. Each attempt to finalize index generates duplication." She meant digital errors, yet her phrase echoed the older folklore line, "She multiply when written down." In her correspondence, she adds quietly, "Sometimes I think she waits for us to stop editing." The sentence was crossed out before submission. The copy preserved in the archive shows faint pressure marks where she changed her mind. At this stage, both believers and skeptics speak the same grammar. Researchers use phrases like persistence, return, residual agency, terms that mirror superstition in academic vocabulary. In conferences, they discuss cultural haunting while disclaiming belief. Ministers preach quiet retribution while disclaiming history. Between those two denials stands the same unnamed woman. Her silence still operational, her absence still generating work, her act still dividing those who cannot admit she existed and those who cannot let her go. In 1982, a young archivist attempted to photograph the original negative of the ledger using new scanning equipment. When the scan completed, the monitor displayed a ghost image letters rearranged into a line that does not exist in any version of the text, "The meal not finished." Technicians blamed data bleed from nearby reels, but the archivist refused to erase it. The scan was quietly stored under image error preserve for study. No one has replicated the glitch. Some say the system translated the old ink's metallic decay. Others say it rendered the song that the paper was already humming. Oral history continued its own reconstruction. In 1993, elder Maria Brooks recorded her grandmother saying, "Every wrong feeds itself till somebody stop the meal." When Brooks was asked who somebody meant, she answered, "The one who don't speak." The statement aligns perfectly with the Bureau phrase from 1867. She refused to answer further. Across 130 years, the same silence repeats in bureaucratic and familial mouth alike. It is the only constant truth measurable through absence. By the early 2000s, scholars began describing the Dinah record not as event but as phenomenon. They no longer asked what happened. They asked why the record could not die. In symposium papers, phrases like living void and archival haunting replaced unverified case. The archive became a shrine by accident. The microfilm cabinet where the ledger rests is always slightly warmer than surrounding metal. Maintenance staff have confirmed the thermostat works normally. Yet the climate report of 2008 lists consistent 2 degrees elevation in cabinet 4B. The difference is statistically irrelevant. Emotionally, it is not. When digital access launched, the scanned images of the ledger and the field notes were uploaded simultaneously. On the interface, users noticed that clicking between the two produced an audible hum artifact of mismatched audio metadata. Still, thousands reported hearing it as rhythm, heartbeat, pulse. Someone overlaid the hum with the hymn, "She Done Eat Last," and found them in perfect synchronization. What began as technical coincidence became cultural liturgy. The archive sings back when touched. In modern folklore circles, this hum has acquired theological meaning. Believers say it is the ledger, breathing skeptics call it feedback resonance. Both descriptions depend on the same condition interaction. The document only sings when someone reads it. The woman only returns when someone looks for her. In this way, the archive has become participatory ritual and invisible supper table where each reader becomes witness and guest, and the silence after the click becomes grace before the meal. Each year, near August 12th, visitors still leave offerings at the Oconee's edge. Flowers, broken spoons, copies of her story. The official park rangers remove them quietly at dusk, recording the action as debris management. Yet among the removed items, one always reappears by morning, a folded scrap of paper bearing the same line written in anonymous hand, "All 3 men expired before dawn." It is the ledger quoting itself again, or perhaps the ground reminding the record of its duty. The modern archive description now ends with a sentence that belongs to no author, record incomplete. Voices ongoing. It appears in the metadata as if automatically generated, though no system is programmed to write commentary. Each year it retypes itself when maintenance clears the database cache. The staff stop deleting it. One curator remarked, "Maybe it's a checksum, maybe it's her way of signing." In the final act of convergence, the song and the sentence collapse into each other completely. The 2019 restoration recording of "She Done Eat Last" ends not with the choir's breath, but with a line whispered off mic, "We still hear." The technician swore it wasn't part of the performance. The waveform analysis shows it synced with the moment the track overlapped the digitized ledger page. If coincidence, it is perfect. If not, it is continuation. And thus, the climax arrives not with noise, but with precision. The record no longer distinguishes between witness and echo, between crime and prayer. Each version becomes the other's translation. The archivists say the case is unresolved, the singers say it is fulfilled. Both are correct. Because in this final bridge, the woman's silence completes the archive's sentence, and the archive finally learns her language: quiet, patient, absolute. In the end, the record closes the way it began, with a silence that behaves like speech. The final microfilm reel of the Oglethorpe County ledgers ends on the word "returned." A fragment with no context, a promise without subject. Archivists debated whether to append an explanatory note. They decided not to. The last page of the state index lists only case concluded by time. Yet every year someone calls the archives asking if the file is still open. The question itself has become part of the record, the echo pretending to be inquiry. After 150 years, the geography of the event remains. The river still widens near the bend where the cabin stood, though no structure remains. Trees grow in near-perfect alignment, forming an accidental corridor toward the water. Botanists call it coincidence of root patterns. Locals call it the way she walk. Each August, when the air thickens and thunder builds but never rains, people claim to hear slow knocking beneath the soil. The sound is faint, rhythmic, 3 beats and pause. The Bureau once labeled it subsurface resonance. The folklore names it the table breathing. The descendants of both families, those of Lang blood and those of Dinah's memory, live within a few counties of each other. None admit relation, yet every family keeps a rule unspoken. No one in Oglethorpe eats alone on August 12th. They say it brings bad luck. Dinner tables fill with food, no one touches until all are seated, and the first bite is taken in silence. It is habit disguised as superstition, superstition disguised as ritual, ritual disguised as remembrance. The historians call it cultural residue. The elders call it manners. A 2009 documentary project attempted to film the clearing. The footage returned partially corrupted. Frames near dusk display a faint outline over the riverbank, the shape of a woman standing, head slightly bowed, outline trembling in the reflection. The filmmaker insisted it was mist distortion. The cameraman swore it was there before the lens fogged. The production team replaced the footage with black screen and sound of wind. In screenings, that black minute became the audience's favorite moment. Silence performed what speech could not, continuation. The modern archive, digitized and indexed, includes her under dual categories: historical case file and living tradition. The note appended by a curator reads, "Retained in perpetuity by request of public interest." In practice, it means the file can never be deleted. Each automatic backup copies her into another server, another system, another silence. The data replicates like ritual. The woman who vanished by walking away now exists across hundreds of mirrored drives stored in cold rooms where machines hum like low hymns. Preservation has become haunting by design. Churches in Georgia and Alabama still sing the melody "She Done Eat Last" during vigils, though no one remembers its author. The last verse, added decades later, ends with a whisper, "She feed us peace." The recording made in 2019 captured something between the final two lines. A low breath, faint but audible. Sound technicians described it as microphone handling noise. Others, including the choir, disagreed. They said they felt the air in the room change, as if someone had stood between them and the wall. The edit kept the breath intact. The producer wrote in the margin, "It belongs." In the academic record, she appears under multiple subjects: gender theology, resistance, myth. None fit cleanly. Each discipline writes one chapter and then stops. There is nothing more to categorize when the subject becomes the method. Professors of history cite her as a case of absence made active. Folklorists describe her as oral gravity. The archivists, less poetic, simply label her file unclosable. Their word choice betrays exhaustion and reverence. She is not entry or event. She is format. The system itself continues to speak in her syntax. By 2020, historians revisiting the Lang materials noted an anomaly in the digital metadata. The auto-generated summary line for her case reads, "No survivors recorded," but every time the system re-indexes, the phrase changes to "None survived the recording." The difference is small, but its implications are vast. The archive, as if aware of its own recursion, writes that survival ends at transcription. What cannot be spoken may persist. What is written may die. The machine now understands the superstition. Outside the archive near the Oconee New Bridge stands a small, unofficial marker made of local stone. No plaque, no inscription, only a shallow groove where letters once were. The surface eroded by hands touching it over decades, skin polishing away meaning. Locals say it once read, "Mercy, 1856. Children skip stones into the river nearby, unaware they play at the edge of the state's oldest unresolved document. The sound of stone striking water matches the tempo of the hymn. The past continues to keep time. Each generation produces one more version of her. In classrooms, she becomes metaphor. In kitchens, cautionary tale. In songs, ancestor. In silence, teacher. Every retelling rearranges the balance between sin and forgiveness, justice and mercy. Yet in all versions, she remains nameless. That absence has become her protection. Where law required identity, legend required anonymity. She lives longest as no one. The erasure that once enslaved her became her resurrection. At the University of Georgia's archive wing, a small brass plate above the microfilm cabinet reads, "Unverified, undeleted." Visitors assume it's procedural. Archivists admit privately that no one installed it. It appeared sometime around 2015 during renovations. When asked who ordered it, the facilities department found no work order. The plate remains. Its reflection glints faintly in the fluorescent light, a small flash of authority surrendering to myth. In the folklore catalogs of the 21st century, her entry expands automatically through cross-referencing algorithms. When researchers upload new material about food rituals, one suggested link always appears: Oconee cook, 1856. The algorithm, indifferent to belief, treats her as connective tissue across categories. Even code recognizes her pattern. The song of the woman who refused to be reduced to line item has become a hyperlink, an electronic ghost threading silence through every database that tries to contain her. Every August, the archivists close the reading room early. They say it's for maintenance, but unofficially it's because equipment often fails that week. The scanners freeze, bulbs flicker, fans stop. Staff wait until midnight, then restart the system. No explanation, no prayer, just a pause. The younger employees laugh it off. The older ones do not. They call it the blackout supper. In the darkness, the hum of the machine sounds almost human. Some truths survive not by evidence, but by endurance. Her story has endured long enough to outlive ownership interpretation, even the state itself. She began as property and became presence. She entered the record as fugitive and remained as frequency. The scholars still search for resolution, but the river has already answered. Every current repeats her act, quiet, decisive, irreversible. And when the voiceover of this documentary ends, when the air stills and no sound remains, that is the truest form of her testimony. Because the archive does not speak in language. It speaks in pause. And in that pause, history turns back on itself like the Oconee's slow bend. The woman never left her page. The page learned to move with her. Maybe they didn't disappear, maybe we did.